In this final video, we are going to create a form for the purchase table. So let's start out with the purchase and go to create tab, auto form. Now we have our, let's close the property sheet. Now we have our form in place. If you look at the view this form, you can basically see we have invoice ID information. Again, it's not that descriptive because you're seeing invoice ID and book ISBN. They do not carry any information. You don't see the book title, for example. And if you like to create a new new purchase order, basically to be included in an invoice, in an existing invoice, you need to type in the invoice ID information here, type in the book ISBN, and type in the quantity ordered. But typing in invoice ID and book ISBN information is not that intuitive. It would be much better if you were to create a drop-down list and select the invoice ID from the drop-down list and select the book, actually book, by looking at the book title from a list and specify how many should be ordered in that particular invoice from that book. So that's what we are going to do. Let's go to design view first, and let's make these boxes a little bit shorter, text boxes a little bit shorter, extend this area so that we can have more space to work with. Okay, and you can change this purchase processing form. Okay, so let's select the invoice ID first. Instead, we are going to create a drop-down list, and in Access we use option called combo box, which is for drop-down list. Select the combo box option from the under Design tab. Place it somewhere in the empty area. So for this combo box, we like to get values from invoice table because the invoice information is placed in the invoice table. Although we are creating a purchase order, which that information will be recorded in the purchase table, the information comes from the invoice table. Since the purchase table is a bridge entity, so we'll be getting our information from the connecting table. So we are going to get it from invoice table, and we like to get invoice side and invoice date because multiple invoices may be issued on the same date, or you may want to see the date information. It will be much easier to locate certain invoices by date maybe. So let's continue that way. Let's sort the list by invoice ID. And the key column is the invoice ID. So we don't want to hide it. We like to see the invoice ID information actually, along with the date information. And this invoice ID is associated with, so that invoice ID will be recorded in purchase table as an invoice ID field. Since Access may not necessarily know that field refers to this field in this table, so you made it more explicit by this way. And next, and you can give a name for this combo box. You may want to name your combo boxes much better to name them. Let's call it invoice ID. This is the name of the combo box. Okay, it's going to be very valuable later when we try to do some add additional features to this form. Okay, then let's move this whole thing up here, and it will automatically fit in here. So let's look at our form. Now you can see drop-down list and with the date. So it's going to be much easier, and let's save the form before we did anything. Purchase entry form, or let's call it purchase processing form for consistency purposes. Okay, save it. And when you're entering a new record, again, it's going to be much easier. You can select it from a list. But it will be much better also if we have same thing for the book information. And for that, we need to go design view and delete the book ISBN, and basically do the same thing for book. So select this drop down list or combo box. Again, we are going to get this time information from book table. We like to get book ISBN as well as book title so that we can see that information is coming from we can see that book ISBN associated with a title. If you like to display, for example, publisher name, For such kind of cases, you may want to use the actual query. So if we can go back, actually we had a query, book info query, where we had booking ISBN, book title, and publisher name. So it's going to be much more descriptive when we are selecting from the list. But then it's going to take a larger space, by the way. Click next, and let's sort them by title, then publisher name, and book ISBN, book title is how they are going to be displayed when you select the drop-down list. So I think this is okay. Click next, and this book ISBN will be associated with book ISBN in purchase table. Next, and let's call this one as book ISBN, this comma box name. Finish, and move this one over here. Basically, we are pretty much done so far. You can view it. If you click this drop down list, now you can see actually this 60 is the first one, Neil Schumann one, and others are like this, so you can see nicely this way. Okay, so when you want to enter a new record, it's going to be much easier, but then you can let's enter a new record into this 369 211 369 invoice, and let's select the book. But the question here is, when you try to process a new purchase order or include the order for a book in an invoice, you can select it from a list, but you don't know whether that actual book is included this invoice or not. I mean, sometimes you may make mistakes, so you don't want to make such mistakes. To prevent such mistakes from happening, it will be nice to have a kind of subform here, where once you select an invoice ID, you can see all the associated book orders in that invoice. So let's try to add this book, for example. If it is there, we are going to get an error message. If it's not, it will be processed. You see that book order exists, so it won't be processed. Click OK, and let's select a different book until we get through it. Okay, select this one. Yes. And let's go to layout, design view again, and let's add our button here, that add new record button. On the record operation, add new record. Let's select add new purchase. And this is purchase button. Finish. Okay, we are pretty much good to on track so far. And the next step is going to be adding a subform, and also we like to have the subform automatically update as we switch from one invoice to another one if you are when you're adding a new purchase order.